to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now here's your host for this week, Micah Marshall.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. It's Micah Marshall. Super excited for you to be with us. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website. It's studentministryconversations.org. And there you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, everything that we do. It's going to be on that website. And our goal here is to inspire, encourage, and just equip all of these youth leaders, youth pastors, whether you're part-time, whether you're full-time, whether you're bivocational, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. If you're working with students in youth ministry, we want you to go over to studentministriesconversation.org. Check us out. We got a lot going on. Today, we're sitting down with my friend Chris Merrill. And Chris, do me a favor, man. Start us off by telling us a little bit about you.
Well, it's hard to figure out where to start, but I came to faith later in life, and I started actually here at Wrightville Assembly of God. That's in Pennsylvania, in Little Wrightville, Pennsylvania, in York County, a little bit south of Harrisburg. But I got started here about 7 years ago in ministry, came on as the connections pastor part-time. And then when I was brought on full-time, I took over youth ministry as well. So I've been doing youth ministry maybe 6 to 7 years right now.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And Chris, you and I have been friends for a little bit now. I had the privilege of being with you not too long ago. And one thing I just found out, which is just blew my mind, I just mentioned it before we hit record. What is your degree in again?
My degree is in neurology and physiology. So I was planning on going to medical school and took my MCATs and everything, but that's part of my journey into coming to faith. Yeah. So I was a bit of a mess,
amazing,
even though I had good grades and everything. I was a drug addict, messed up, kind of like living the life over here in public that I was doing really well. And yet in private, I was, slowly drowning myself. But God got hold of me really miraculously at about 24 years old.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I really appreciate about you, Chris, and about your ministry is the authenticity that you bring into everything that you do. You're very authentic. You're very like, dude, here's my life. Here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's a little bit what I want to talk with you about today, because I think a lot of times, especially in the culture that we live in, we have this tendency to always either be elevated by people or elevate ourselves about people and put ourselves or have other people put us on a pedestal. Whereas a youth pastor or as a youth leader, especially the teens, we're seen as this like we are an icon, we're a youth leader, we're all these different things that happen. And a lot of times we get caught up in all of that. So I guess my biggest question to kind of kick all this off is like, how do we stay so authentic? Like, how do you do this? How do you just remain authentic in everything that you do? Because I've watched you with students, with parents, with leaders, with your pastor. You've remained authentic in all of these things. So like, kind of walk me through all of this, because I know this is a big thing for you.
Yeah. When I got started in ministry, my wife and I, one of the biggest things that we really wanted people to know was just the authenticity about our life. And now I'll tell you, I don't always get it right. Sometimes I wear my heart on my sleeve a little too much sometimes. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but you have to find the correct boundaries with transparency in different situations. But one thing that's important to me is the fact that that people know the real person. I'll tell you what, especially in student ministry, they can smell hypocrisy.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
I just tell you, I don't look good in skinny jeans. Okay. So there's nothing I can do to this body that will impress anybody. But one of the things, I worked in physical therapy for about 8 years, and traveled around the country, got to talk to CEOs, CFOs, CDOs. So I've been in those places, but I've also been in the Water Street Mission, working with the homeless and everything. And, I've really realized people are people. Titles will come and go, but, everybody is a person. And so, I'm just not impressed with titles. I'm not impressed with the things that that people are often grasping for when it comes to those things. And so I always joke around. People say, "What do you do there?" I say, "I don't even know. I'm just me." As youth ministers, often it's a slash slash slash. I do this, that, and the other
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah,
I've
we
just
don't know what we're
learned.
doing half the time anyways. We're just having fun doing it.
Yeah, and I've just learned throughout all that to be transparent because I was thinking about this when we were talking about maybe meeting. Even Jesus, when kids would show up in front of Jesus, they were magnetized to him. Kids were trying to get to Jesus, to the fact that the disciples were trying to push them away, be like, he's got more important things to do here. But just think about this for a second. Kids don't go to old curmudgeons. They don't want to hang out with
Whoa,
people that.
whoa, whoa. We're throwing out some big words here. I
Sorry.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. I
Well,
haven't
people
heard that.
people like, so think about this though. Like, I'm betting Jesus was like one of those guys that had like juggling balls in his pocket that even he'd get it out,
Yeah.
and there was something magnetic about Jesus, that people wanted to be around him, and he was completely authentic. I think sometimes when we see those stained glass windows of Jesus with the halo and all that, uh, I don't think I don't think kids go up to people like that. And you and I both know,
Mm,
like the old guy who comes in with candy in his pockets, like that's who the kids go running up to. And so
yeah.
he was so accessible, and I always want to make sure that I'm accessible to people.
Wow.
Um, I have
Wow.
my boundaries and everything, but at the same time, I I, I know I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but I meet with an old guy named Fred. He's an old retired minister. He's over 80 now, and he told me this story about a guy in his ministry who was just so difficult to work with the whole time. Finally, he was leaving that church to go to another church. They had this celebration for him, and he comes up and he says, "Hey, Fred, I just want to wish you luck. I just want you to know, like, we're really excited for you, and we're really gonna miss you here." And he said, I looked at him and said, "Miss me?" He's like, "You've been mad at me the whole time I've been here." And the guy said, "Yeah, Fred, we disagreed a lot, but I never doubted that you loved me." I was like,
Wow.
that's what I want for my ministry. We may
Yeah.
disagree. I may have to have hard conversations with people, but I want people at the end of the day to go, "I never doubted that you loved me." And Jesus, as much as he was whipping people out of the temple and doing some difficult things, having conversations with Pharisees, as I want to be like Jesus, where I offend Pharisees, but attract the sinners and yet live a holy life.
Man, Chris, that is a very powerful statement. You want to offend the Pharisees, but you want to attract the sinners. I think that's so important. Working in youth ministry, we have our challenges, we have our ups and downs, and we're in this time frame of world where everybody is looking to follow people, right?
Mm,
So we have like the Instagram likes, you have the social networking, you have all these things, likes, and people are so prone to go after social influencers, right? And like
yeah,
I will be the first to tell you, there are so many pastors out there that you can look up on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. They will preach 500 times better than I can. They will blow me out of the water. And they will have the cool jeans on, they'll have the lights, they'll be able to pull you in with their stories. But the one thing that they aren't able to do is they aren't able to compete with the love that I have for my students.
yeah,
And I've seen you and I've watched you do that. I've watched you be able to just share the love with students and with all of that. And part of that journey is, I loved what you said, is that you and your wife made the decision to be authentic. And
yeah.
so as you guys have progressively been going on several different years, what would you say is the biggest challenge about being authentic that you're facing?
My wife has been battling cancer for 7 years now. Um,
Mm,
and when you're in any kind of leadership position, people like to tell you what they think a lot. So,
isn't
I mean,
that the truth?
I'm serious. I've gotten the emails that say, I think your wife may be sick because she doesn't have enough faith. I mean, you want to reach through the computer and knock somebody's lights out, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, it's really difficult to have authenticity and transparency when you're going through some things and people are going to tell you what they think. And I always have to remind myself this: listen, even that email, those people are genuinely coming from a place where they want her to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And I always have to remind myself to like put my shoe on the other foot. Like I used to do orientations for physical therapy, and the front office managers would always say to me, "Hey, like I really don't do much here. I'm not the therapist." I'm like, "Yes, but you're the first person they see when they walk in the door."
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has a story. Every single person has a story, and if you show that you care a little bit about their story, so in the midst of that challenge, it like handling all of the pressures I have at home and balancing hard decisions with my wife and my kids, because I have a 11-year-old daughter, Eden, and a 8-year-old son, Gray. So the majority of their life has been their mom battling cancer. So,
Wow.
those things are really challenging, but we let people into the journey. And Jesus did the same thing. That was discipleship.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think we have to
Yeah.
be careful when we think of discipleship to like segregate it to like this knowledge passing, but there's an impartation part about it as well, which is like, hey, come walk with me. Like, let me show you like kind of what I'm going through, what I'm dealing with. And then with Jesus' closest disciples, he would take those few away and go, "Did you see what I did there?" Even in the midst of all this, I want to just kind of give you a picture into how I've dealt with this, and then the transparency to say I haven't always done it right. Uh,
Yeah.
I've apologized to my wife. I've apologized to my kids. I've apologized to youth students. I remember this youth student at
Mm-hmm.
convention, just this national youth convention this last year. Man, I was dealing with an issue with another kid, and I come through and I find that she's like talking to this boy outside of the thing and should be in the service, and I just said, "Hey, get in there!" I kind of like laid it on her, and later I realized like, hey, I was kind of transposing what I was dealing with over here and just took it out on her. So I
Mm-hmm.
took her aside later and said, "Listen, I was wrong in the way that I reacted to you, and I apologize." And man, even though I was wrong, do you know how much that opens up relationships to just
Yeah,
be like,
dude.
hey, we can
Yeah.
be on the same page. None of us are perfect. I don't have my halo yet. In fact, I'm not going to get one. So I'm hoping for a crown. Forget a
Yeah.
halo.
Yeah. Oh man, Chris, thank you for just being so vulnerable and sharing that. I mean, it's so and I know this is like a harder part of the conversation. I didn't think, about going here, but it's very these type of situations are very real because we I have my own things in my life with my wife and I that we've had to walk through where people have sent us emails and this and that with all this stuff, and they have good intentions. They really do, but it's annoying sometimes and it's frustrating because we've been dealing with the hardships of that. And and I know for a fact that you believe that God can heal, you believe in medicine, you believe in doctors, I mean, you believe in all these things, and it's this crazy journey that we go on with Jesus where the the real hard aspects of life hit us. And as leaders, we have been telling students how to live through hard stuff, but now
Mm-hmm.
we're having to do it too.
Yeah.
It's like kind of that example where you're like, hey, I can pray with someone, they get healed. I can pray with someone and they go to the doctor and get the medicine that they need, do whatever needs to happen to improve them. But what about my wife?
Yeah.
Like, what about like, and I find myself sometimes getting into this Jacob moment with God where I wrestle back and forth. Like, God, I know that you do miracles. I know that you do the supernatural. I know that you've given wisdom to doctors. I know you've done all these things. Like, what is going on? But
Yeah.
what I have found is when I walk through that with my wife, but also with my students, they get to realize that being a Christian is the greatest thing that you can do, but it's the hardest thing that you can ever live out.
Yeah, and that's so true. Actually, that story you told, there's two stories during this whole journey through this cancer, but that's been one of them. Is God really showed me Jacob wrestling with him, and just looking at that and recognizing, on the other end, I'm going to have a limp, but
Hmm.
people are going to see that limp and they're going to say like, there's his testimony right there. Like he wrestled with God, and he gets a name change at that point. I don't know why God always, God doesn't always, but often uses pain. And one of the best books I've read is Leadership Pain by Sam Chand.
Okay.
Really good book when you're thinking about this kind of stuff. And he always says like your threshold of pain is your threshold of leadership. And
Wow.
you know, many people want leadership, but they don't want the pain that comes with it. And I think being able to walk people through that. I mean, Jesus himself promised in this world you're going to have trouble. People forget that's a promise. That's
Yeah.
not like that's like, oh, you might have a difficult time, but come to me and everything's going to be peachy. You realize the once I got into ministry, I mean, I was making more money doing something else than doing ministry, right? This
Come
isn't the
on.
most
Yeah.
lucrative business. Um,
No, it's not.
but at the same time, like I took a huge step of faith to move in this direction, and then my wife gets cancer. I mean,
Mm,
you can't help but go, God, this doesn't quite make sense. I'm leaving it all for you. But in the midst of the journey is where he does the most incredible work. And
yeah.
we've seen testimony. I have journals that I've highlighted where God answered the prayer that I prayed on October 13th, you know, and I can highlight it and show, look, I was praying about this and look how he came through. And the people we've met, the relationships we've built. I mean, I wish God had done it outside of cancer, but he still
Yeah.
used it in the midst of the journey. And I think that's what people forget. I think we live, especially as Pentecostals, we're in a Pentecostal fellowship, but um, especially as Pentecostals, sometimes we want the miracle as like a quick way out. I don't know if that makes sense to you, you know,
Come on. Come
but
on.
too many of us, because we live in a microwave culture, we want the quick result. And God works both ways. Like
Yeah.
he can microwave the problem, and he did it with me with alcohol, just totally released me from that. But then the other drugs and stuff like that, that took a sanctification journey. And so he often uses that journey to
Wow.
do so much more
Yeah.
than we thought was possible. There's a C.S. Lewis quote. I can't quote it directly right now, but it's such a huge one for me in my life. Is he talks about us being like a house, and when you come to faith, you know, there's some things you knew that needed fixed, and so he's like, God kind of like fixes those things, and you thought you were being made into like this little cottage, but all of a sudden he starts knocking about the house and throwing out a wing here and doing this thing over here. He says, and then but he didn't intend for you to be a little cottage. He's creating a mansion, and he intends to come and dwell in
Wow.
it. And
Yeah.
man, that
Chris, let
no,
me,
I'm not quoting that verbatim,
yeah.
but
Yeah. No,
that's what I listened
that's
to, and
amazing.
like that's what he does in the midst of all those things. Like here, I thought it was going to look like this, but he goes way beyond what we can ask, think, or imagine, and he does it in ways um, that we could have never imagined.
Yeah. So, Chris, let me ask you this. When you've walked through this with you and your wife and your family, and obviously we bring it to work, right? We bring it to youth. We bring it. How has living a life of authenticity, even in the hardships of what's going on, how has that affected your students? How's that affected your youth ministry?
Mm, that's a good question. Um, they've seen me cry.
Mm,
They've seen me cry. Think about this: the disciples saw Jesus cry.
yeah.
Jesus wept. That's the other story that really, John chapter 11, when Lazarus is raised from the dead, you know, Jesus comes there. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows it. He already said to other people it's going to happen. And yet he cried, even in the midst of the journey. And so if Jesus can go through those emotional ups and downs and still see the miracle, I think we can too. And
Mm,
they've been there. I have picture after picture of students just coming up and praying for me, because that's a
wow.
two-way thing. I think so many times we in ministry, we have to have it all together, and we're the ones that pray.
Yeah.
Um, but when we give them the opportunity to do the same in return, like, hey, I need prayer tonight, guys. Like, I'm going through some things. Just this last week, we had a doctor's appointment, and hey, would you guys be willing to pray for me? Like, that's authenticity. And yeah, so I think sometimes we forget that like part of the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. the patience part is the thing that um, that's really hard in all of it, and I think letting them in on that journey in the midst of it. I missed winter retreat last year because my wife was, her cancer had returned and with a vengeance, and we were meeting with the oncologist, and I just realized I can't go to this. I have to have some other leaders go. But I showed up one of the nights, and Joe Callie, who's our Pendle district youth director, um, knew what I was going through, and he prayed for me, and students prayed for me, and I've just included them in on that journey, as I hope that they would with me in their life.
Yeah, well, I think you and I have both been in youth ministry to a certain point where we understand sometimes you give, and when they give back, dude, it will wreck your world.
Yeah,
When students step into the element of faith that you've been teaching them for so long, and like everything, it's kind of that thing you've taught them over and over and you're like, is anything getting through? Are they learning anything? But then in a season that is difficult for you and being so authentic, they activate that very thing that you have planted and sowed into
yeah,
them all of those nights. Even those kids that like you wanted to literally throw them out
yeah,
the door. A lot of
yep,
times they'll be the ones that'll be like, hey, I'm praying for you. Hey, I love you. Hey, I appreciate what you've done. And so I love the fact that the students have rallied around you, because I think what that says is, I think that says, number one, I think it talks about your leadership. But number two, what it does is it exposes them to the fact that like life isn't perfect when you're a Christian.
yes, yep,
Just because you love Jesus doesn't mean it's all going to be perfect all the time. Because a
yeah,
lot of times that's what we think. We think, oh, as soon as I encounter Jesus, as soon as I get saved, my life will be perfect. It's actually, like you said, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a
mm-hmm,
lot harder. But what we have is we have a foundation, we have a basis, we have a covering, we have protection, we have a healer, a provider, all of these things that are able to just bring everything that we need. And for me, I always say it's, what I love about faith is it gives me something to be firm on when
yeah,
nothing else, when everything else is shaken, I can stand firm on my faith because
yep,
everything else is falling apart. And
yeah,
so, being able to walk that out with your wife and your students and your kids, like
yeah,
that, like they're even in this dynamic. And what we know about youth ministry is like when you're a youth pastor, like your wife is automatically a youth pastor too. Your kids are automatically part of the family. And so I can just imagine that, how that has affected everyone. But being able to be authentic in who you are, I think that shows more Jesus a lot of times than what we preach from the platform.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many times that we don't realize we're discipling people. And we're discipling people. Last week, I couldn't be at youth service because I was at my daughter's choir concert. But I was honest with them the week before, like, hey, I'm missing next week because my daughter is going to be in a choir concert. And like, that's a priority for me. Like, my discipleship
Mm,
starts at home, before
absolutely.
I ever come in. And so they see those things. But you're right. That what you hit the nail on the head. There are so many kids. I mean, there was one kid, man, he would just beat on the chairs all the time. I'm like, calm down, dude, stop that. Right. And then there was this one time I asked a question during my sermon, and his hand goes up, and I must have looked around like, okay, you. And then he answered the question. I must have given him a look like this, like, that's right, because and then he goes, "You thought I wasn't listening, Pastor Chris?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't think you were
Yeah, I
listening
knew
ever,
you were
man." Like,
listening.
yeah, but one of the things that's so important for me, for our youth ministry in particular, is we hear the statistics of kids whenever they graduate high school, they start losing their faith. But in the time that they're in youth ministry, one of the things I want to push in is you will have trouble. Like, I think so many times we kind of sugarcoat these kids throughout youth ministries, and we come and they have a good time, they get entertained, but they have this like safe haven. And then all of a sudden we release them and they realize, wow, life isn't all rainbows and butterflies. That thing they showed me before, that doesn't work. And I
Mm,
want to show them a faith that works. As James says,
yeah.
it's like you have this faith, but then you don't do it. You have to exercise faith takes risk, and it's risky to pray bold prayers in front of your students when you haven't seen them fully happen.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
they need to learn it. And where better to learn that than within the youth group where they can try. Like try that. I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
students in our fine arts for the Assemblies of God that I just said, like, a student tried short sermon this year. I'm like, just give it a try. I'll help you. We'll work through it. Man, she killed it. She would be going to nationals if we'd be going to nationals, but I'm just saying, like, just try it,
Yeah.
and then I would have never done that when I was her age.
Yeah. Well, I think the great thing about youth ministry is it's a safe place to try. It's a
Mhm.
safe place to try. When you have youth leaders and youth pastors and directors and people that are in your corner in youth ministry, doing those type of things are good. And it's I know for me, I have prayed for things consecutively over years. They still have not come true. But guess what? I haven't stopped praying. I
Yeah,
haven't stopped talking about it. I haven't stopped being open about it. And being authentic with our students, I think goes a lot farther in the depth of relationship that we have with them than we normally think.
yeah,
Because again, you can preach as many sermons as you want, and you can be an excellent orator on the platform and talking, but when they know that there's some real stuff going on in your life that you are actively having to balance out, but yet you're still showing up, you're still loving them, you're still caring about them, you're still going to their basketball game, you're still doing this, you're still doing that. Once you're able to do all of these things and you're able to just be that blessing to a generation, and they see that, it's like, again, I think a lot of times we put so much emphasis on the night of what we're presenting rather than
mhm,
just being there and being a
yeah,
presence. And I know for a fact, man, I just know that your students are so blessed to be able to have you and to be able to walk with you through this experience. And so, I would ask any viewers, whether you're listening to the audio or you're listening online on YouTube, whatever it might be, man, keep Chris and his wife in your prayers. Continually pray for God to do a miraculous work in their lives, and continue
yeah.
to allow wisdom and guidance and just all of those things. And, Chris, we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but do you have any closing thoughts you want to share? Anything that you would like our listeners or viewers to just leave with as we close this up?
Yeah, I just got back from the Maldives a little bit ago, 2 weeks ago. My wife last year at this time, her cancer come back. She was going through hard chemo. So they told us if we did nothing last year, she'd be gone in a year. And even if we knock this back, the statistics show 2 to 5 years. Well, that changes your
Mm,
perspective um, on one day we'll do this. One day
yeah.
we'll do that. It gives you some urgency. So we decided to do a bucket list trip. And at the very end of the trip, the guy who leads the food and beverage on this island called me up and said, "Hey, where are you eating breakfast tomorrow?" I said, "Well, we're going to this, to the only place that's on the island. It's a little tiny island." And he said, "Well, give me what you guys usually order, and I'll have somebody pick you up and take you." Well, they take us to the fancy restaurant, like super fancy restaurant over the water the next day. And I walk in and no one's in there. And I said to the waitress, I said, what's going on? And she said, "Well, they closed the restaurant for just you, your wife, and the kids." I mean, this is like a Michelin star restaurant. I mean, my family started crying. We're like, really? So it was our family, the head chef, and a waitress at this fancy restaurant over the water in the Maldives. My wife kept saying, "Why'd they do this for us? Like, why would they do this?" And I started thinking back of all the people that we've met along the way, all the people that we met in on the island, and we got so close with the staff. And even my son, the other day, I asked him, "What did you miss from the Maldives most?" And his first response was, "The people."
Wow.
If we don't love people, we're missing it. We're missing
Mm,
it. And it would be so easy in a situation like ours to get so internally focused and just protect what's mine. Um, but we've been called to love people, even
yeah.
the difficult ones. And
Yeah.
and I just want people at the end of the day to know I care. And if that can be the reality of your life, you are going to make disciples. You are going to make disciples, whether you realize it or not. And so my prayer for people, and especially in youth ministry, when you get through the challenges, that kid that you just can't stand, the youth leader that just won't get it, love them. Love them as much as you can, and leave the rest to the Lord. The last verse I'll leave you off with is in Proverbs 21. It says, "We prepare the horse for battle, but victory rests with the Lord." It makes me realize I'll do what I can do, but at the end of the day, the rest is in the Lord's hands. And that takes a lot of burden and pressure off of my shoulders in ministry. I don't know about you.
Yeah, dude. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, man, thank you so much for sharing that and just talking very candid with us about the journey that you're on. So let me ask you, if people want to follow you or follow your youth ministry, can you drop some socials for us so that we know where to follow you at?
Yeah, so we lead the current youth ministry out of Wrightville Assembly of God, and my handle, or whatever you call it, is Chris Merrill 10 on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not cool enough. I can't get there, man. But maybe one day. But honestly, I got to put a team of people around me to be able to, that do have those giftings. And then Christopher Merrill on Facebook. Certainly, if you'd love to reach out, it's cmerrill@wrightsvillechurch.com. That's my email. I always love helping other youth pastors, other people that if I could speak into your life in some way or be there for you, I'd love to do that.
Awesome. Well, and we'll also drop it in the show notes. So I'll drop all your information in the show notes so that they have that, so they can connect with you. And I will tell you, totally off topic, the dude posted a sweet picture video of a turtle. So there's a turtle right there with you. And so they need to check that out. I saw that. I was like, boy, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, but hey, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate your heart. I'm glad to call you my friend. And I love what you're doing in ministry. And so I just want to encourage everybody, Student Ministry Conversations, make sure you check it out on all of the platforms. We're out there, studentministriesconversations.org as well. All of our podcasts are listed. But thank you so much, Chris, and we appreciate you. We appreciate what you're doing for the kingdom. Hey, and until next time. Oh, go ahead.
I appreciate you, Micah, and all that you do for the kingdom, and just love what God's doing through your ministry as well. So please know, people watch, people hear, and you're doing some great things. So I appreciate you as well.
Thank you, man. Thank you, man. All right. We're done with our bromance, and I appreciate you, bro. You're awesome. Tune in, Student Ministry Conversations. Until next time, we'll see you later.